Dave Lanker, Alameda County Fire. And John Bowder, City Council.
That's a fully resident.
Ken Bukowski, former council member, videographer.
So welcome everybody. We always start off with public comment, and we have members of the public today, so I'm excited. So would any member of the public like to say something?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Please.
I heard on the radio an interesting way to combat graffiti, and that is by getting a drone and hooking a paint sprayer to it so you can get to different places and out to eradicate graffiti. You may want to look into that.
I couldn't
So
understand.
I'll repeat that. So he was saying a way to abate graffiti, particularly at high places, is to have a paint spraying drone that can reach those levels.
Right.
And so he said that might be what we should look into.
Well, I'll just say that the police department had a very nice open house, and it was very enjoyable.
And that's all members of the public, so we'll move. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Moved.
Seconded, so minutes are approved. And so first action item is review and comment on the local hazard.
All right. In 2015, we embarked on an update of our local hazard mitigation plan. And the reason why we did it, one, is mandated. In order for us to receive mitigation funding, either pre or post disaster, we have to have a local hazard mitigation plan, and we have to update it every 5 years. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. We're updating our 2009 plan. But also, it makes sense. It reduces the potential for loss of life, injury, and property damage. And it's better, in my opinion, to be proactive instead of reactive. Mitigation is most effective when it's based on a comprehensive long-term plan that is developed before a disaster occurs. The purpose of going through this exercise is to identify policies that we have made implemented or need to implement, as well as identify actions that we can take over the long term to reduce the city's risk and future losses from these hazards. When FEMA has to approve all plans, they're going to be looking at 5 elements, and they're to be included in our plan. And they're going to be looking at our planning process, the hazard identification and risk assessment, our mitigation strategy, plan review, evaluation, and implementation, plan adoption, and whether or not there's any additional state requirements and if we've included them in our plan. And I'll be going over these in the subsequent slides. So in the planning process, FEMA considers the planning process almost, if not more important than the plan itself. They really want it to be a community plan. And so they're going to be looking to see if we gave the public an opportunity to comment. Did we engage with our neighboring communities or other neighboring communities and local and regional agencies to get them involved? Did we review and incorporate existing plans and studies that the city already has? And is there documentation on the planning process? Who was involved and how the public was involved? And does the plan maintenance section indicate how the community will continue to be involved? So what did we do for our planning process? Well, we conducted a local hazard community survey. We did that online and on paper. We had it at the senior center. We had it here at City Hall. I went to one of the the Spring Festival and the Community Expo, and I had the survey there for people to complete. We convened a local hazard mitigation updates planning team, which consisted of representatives from every department, Alameda County Fire, and we had 2 community members sit on our team. We held 3 community workshops in May of 2016. We did this in conjunction with the Climate Action Plan update, and so we worked with Public Works on that. We participated in Alameda County City's working group for local hazard mitigation plan updates because we were all updating our plans at the same time. And then we engaged with outside institutional stakeholders such as East Bay Mud, Caltrans, BART, PG&E. And so for hazard identification, they're looking at does the plan include a description of the types, location, and extent of all natural hazards? Does the plan include a description of the jurisdiction's vulnerability to these hazards with the types and numbers of existing and future buildings? Does the plan show the potential dollar losses? And does the plan have a general description of the land uses and development trends? So what we as the team did is we reviewed the risks to do our hazard analysis. We looked at the risks that were identified in our previous plan. We looked at the risks that our neighboring cities, Berkeley, Oakland, and Alameda, because they were all writing plans at the same time, and some of them had them approved before ours, that they had identified in their local hazard mitigation plans, because we have similar risks. And then we also reviewed the risks that were identified in our community survey. We as a team also decided to incorporate not just natural hazards, but man-made hazards as well in our plan. And so these are the 9 hazards that we came up with, and they are in priority order. And so it's earthquake, hazardous materials, climate change, fires, floods, civil unrest, infrastructure utility failure, terrorism, and biological threats. And then for element C was the mitigation strategy. And so they're looking at, does our plan have a blueprint for reducing potential losses identified in the risk assessment? Does the plan include a description of the mitigation goals to reduce or avoid long-term vulnerabilities to the identified hazards? And does the plan include an action plan on how each mitigation idea will be prioritized, implemented, and administered? So some of the goals and objectives of our plan is obviously to reduce the potential for loss of life, injury, and economic damage to the city. We want to increase the city's ability to serve the community during and after a hazard event by mitigating the risk to key city functions, such as our response, recovery, and rebuilding. We want to protect the city's unique character and values from being compromised by a hazard event. And we want to encourage mitigation activities to increase the disaster resilience of the city, and the private companies, as well as the lifeline systems that are essential to our ability to function. So what we did is we brainstormed mitigation ideas for the hazards we identified. What we did is we took each hazard and we said, all right, let's come up with 3 to 5 mitigation ideas for each identified hazard. And then we analyzed each mitigation idea and rated them for their feasibility, their social benefits, their economic benefits, their environmental improvement, and their community objectives. And under each one of those, there were different categories. Like under feasibility, it was like costs, or do we have funding, those kinds of things. And we would rate them on a 1 if they met the criteria, a 0 if there was no impact, and -1 if we thought it would have a negative impact. And then we tallied all those ratings and came up with a number, which is what we then used to categorize each mitigation idea into their low, medium, or high priority, or as a long-range idea, or something that we're in process, or that's something we've even completed. And so these are the mitigation ideas that we came up with.
Can you leave that up for a minute, that slide? Can you put that one back? So yeah, thank you. Okay.
And then element D is, does the plan reflect changes in development and progress made in local mitigation efforts since the last plan? And we did work with planning and building and looked at all the development changes that we had, and if we had done any of our mitigation ideas from the last plan. Element F is state requirements. There are no state of California requirements beyond FEMA's requirements. And then element E is plan adoption. So there must be documentation that the plan has been formally adopted by the governing body, and the adoption must take place within 1 year of FEMA's approval. So FEMA recommends that we obtain FEMA approval first before we bring the plan to the council to adopt. And so when we did our local hazard mitigation plan update, it's divided into 5 sections: the background introduction, we go into the hazard risks in Emeryville, the mitigation strategy, our hazard analysis, and then our plan maintenance. And so our next steps right now is we're bringing the plan to the various subcommittees to try to get public input. And once we have, the final will be, we're going to bring it to council on November 7th, which will then incorporate all the comments that we've received during this process. And then once the council says yay, then we will submit it to the state and FEMA for approval, and then bring it back to the council for adoption. Any comments or questions?
My question? Specific to the update part itself. Can you highlight what some of the key updates were?
So our 2009 plan was pretty light. and so I went much more in depth. You know, if we talked about earthquakes, so some of the changes were, if we go back to.
Yeah, you had that colored page. And
Well, there's not just the color, it's more as we really went into detail, like under earthquakes. In the plan, there's a section on ground shaping, liquefaction, fire, the whole built environment. All of those things we address individually in our plan, which weren't addressed in the last plan. So we had contacted, like we were in contact with PG&E, East Bay Mud. We went into communications, like the Verizon, Comcast, Pactel, what we're gonna be able to do. So we really kind of dug down deeper when we did this update.
So between now and when it would come for us to review, that's helpful to know. Was that the case for all 9 of those categories, or was it mostly earthquakes or a couple of them?
So the last plan only covered earthquakes, hazardous materials. It touched briefly on climate change, fires, and floods. And it did a little bit on terrorism and biological threat. No, I don't think it did terror. It did biological threats. But they were like one paragraph.
So we have several all categories that are completely new. So in terms of preparing to comment, that can help focus our.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we went into details on all of these, of what it could and what impact it could have on the city.
And my only other question is, we don't have storms of any kind other than, we don't, and maybe it's just not, it just struck me, maybe growing up in the Midwest, there's tornadoes and thunderstorms and all those other things. I just thought it was weird we didn't have storms, so we don't view them as a disaster potential or a hazard.
No, because we don't really have them under extreme weather. I mean, yes, we have like under extreme weather, heat or freeze.
So
But they're
almost climate
seasonal,
change, okay.
really, but floods, seasonal will address storms,
Right.
because that's really where when you go under floods and you go under seasonal, it'll talk about seasonal storms like rain
Okay,
and flooding.
okay.
So some of these, you'll see if you go through the plan, are under, like jet fuel line is like twice, because it was addressed in earthquakes, but then again, it's also addressed under a hazardous materials release. So,
Flooding and tsunami are 2 big weather events out here,
yeah.
just given our weird location with the bay, and there's just nowhere for it to build up to.
So we don't really get tornadoes. It's really for us.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking more like the rare occurrence of
So
like
like
electrical
hail,
storms
you
or
know,
things like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's very rare.
And my other question was in the very first category, A, that you had, like, not on this page, but in the steps that you did, the 5, 6 steps, you had the public outreach process, and I just wondered how many members of our public engaged.
We had, like, to our survey, we had 52 responses to the online survey. We had maybe total, the public workshops were not that well attended, but people that came were very engaged. So I would say we probably had, I think at one, we maybe had the most we probably had was 8.
Okay, well, that's actually good for a public meeting.
Yeah.
And the 52 surveys, was that residents or residents and business owners?
It doesn't,
It's not distinguished at all?
you know, it might be in the end, in the questions. If we ask that in the survey, do you live, work, or
Or visit?
visit? I'm not 100% sure there's age. There's, no, female. No, I don't think we asked whether, it's have you lived or worked in Emeryville, is I think how we did it.
And they choose one or the other, or that's just a yes, no?
It's just a yes,
Okay.
no, and tell us how many years, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I have just one question, and we'll wrap up with a comment. How widely distributed is it now that's in draft form and you're taking it to these committees? Have we begun to send it to members? Is it?
I sent the draft out to, we put it on the website.
Okay.
I've sent it out to all of our like neighboring communities and to like East Bay Mud and to anybody that I engage with got a copy of this. And not even, and then all of the surrounding cities got a copy.
I mean, So you, I'm sorry, I got the impression you were bringing it to the other subcommittees.
Oh, who's?
Have you distributed to them yet, is my question.
The only sustainability committee has it.
Because I think the sooner, it's a very dense document.
Right.
And so the more time they have to page through it, the better.
Right.
So with that said, public questions or comments?
Yeah, have we looked at what's happening in Florida as an example of what we could do, like water storage, evacuation plans, food storage?
Yeah, that is part, it's not necessarily part of this, it's part of the emergency operations plan, and that we are working on that.
Okay, and I think one threat we really need to look at is a tsunami. I mean, we could get a tidal wave very easily.
That's all.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Any discussion or?
No, thank you for building this out. It sounds like, especially on earthquakes, which is a super important issue for this area, that it looks like you really built out. I did only get so much time, as you alluded to review it, so I will look at it more carefully before we come before council. Do you know when we're going to do that?
November, it's
7th.
on slate for November 7th.
Okay, so yeah, so that's plenty of time, and I'll dig into that, and then, but it's helpful to know what the updates were and what we're looking at, and it seems pretty comprehensive, so I appreciate it.
Have you seen the 2007 plan?
Or 9.
9, sorry.
No, that's one of the things I'm trying, but I'm aware that we have them, so
Yeah.
I mean, I can email it.
Oh, did we get that in the email? Was that one of the, it was,
No.
the two things were actually the same thing.
Yeah,
Yes, just
it
a
was
link
like,
to the
yeah,
current.
link in the
Current one,
document,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you
Current
could,
one's
that'd
too
be
big.
great, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure this is a huge advancement.
Huge improvement over the previous plan, so thank you. All right, I think that covers it all, so bear with me while I open my phone.
Is there anything that you feel like you wanted to ask us specifically? Like that you're like, hey, this part of it was controversial or discussed a lot, so when we come to you, we might have questions on this particular area of it, or pay attention to this area, so if you have feedback between now and November, we'd like to hear it further in advance, because it might be complicated.
I don't, when we met with the public, there wasn't, the biggest change came out of it is they wanted us, we had climate change as number 4 and fires as number 3, and they asked us to reverse that.
Mm.
And that was on each, we had 3 workshops, and every workshop that came up, that they felt that was more important. The other one was, I think we made a lot of the changes, like I had civil unrest and protests. They asked me to remove protests, because protest is legal, you can protest. But civil unrest would be the issue, not necessarily a protest. So those were a lot of the comments had to do with the climate change that people were concerned about.
But even though protest is legal, there sometimes are counter protesters and.
Well, I think we kind of lumped that under civil unrest as opposed to the word protest.
So not diving too down into that too deep, but like for FEMA's purposes, does having a separately titled or bolded category, is that particularly relevant or germane to the work they're going to do with this plan when it's operationalized, or no?
No,
Okay,
no,
that's good.
no. FEMA only really requires you to look at earthquake, fires, and floods in your plan. Those are mandates. Although they were now recommending, it's like under terrorism and infrastructure, it really is like cyber terrorism, and they are suggesting that you put that in your plans. And the climate change.
They're saying take that one out, right? This is under action items, so do you need to take any action, or is it just now that
No,
level on the
that's
agenda?
all that it is.
Perfect.
No, there's no action.
Okay, could take an action soon. With that, I'll hand it off to Chief Whitaker.
Thank you. I apologize in advance. July and August, underneath the categories of suppression, investigations, and false alarms, there was a typo. The numbers were carried over, so they were not, in fact, identical, although the documentation in front of you suggests that they were. Note we've had a significant increase in the number of outside fires over the last 2 months. No clusters, no tracking, no commonality, just appears to be a fluke. I mean, everything from a small fence fire up in the north end of town to a cigarette and tan bark in the vicinity of Pixar. So we've seen a lot of those, but there is no clustering, and there doesn't appear any to be related in any way. Moving down to EMS, as we have seen in past months, there is a significant swing year over year. However, there is no steady trend, either up or down. If you look at for July, we were down across the board. For August, we were up significantly. This is consistent with what we see month over month, and as I mentioned before, a small number of folks with a emergent medical condition will shift the numbers in Emeryville because their sample size is so small. And other than that, freeway calls continue to be, as a general statement, trending downward, and then last month we saw a significant increase. And we're still working with Berkeley and Oakland to see if that is there truly a change in traffic patterns, or is there what I suspect more likely a change in the dispatching patterns, which is what makes a big swing. So while the conditions on the freeway are unchanged, how those calls are being routed and to who and who is receiving them, there's a potential for quite a bit of change there based on things as simple as turnover in various dispatch centers. If there are any questions, that concludes it.
I have no questions.
I'm good as well. Any public questions? Okay, moving on. Robinson, with the crime stats. Ken, did you get the crime stats?
So in August, we had 217 part-time crimes. This is down compared to July. We're down 17%. The year-to-date, we're up 20%, and this is an overall grand total. In our violent crimes category, our violent crimes for the month compared to July were down 5%, and for year-to-date, we're down 10%. In the robbery category, there were no patterns, but we did have, of the 6, we had 4 shoplifts in which the suspect used force or fear to take the merchandise, and we only made 1 arrest. The other 2 robberies consisted of strong arms. There was a strong arm robbery at Starbucks in the plaza. A laptop was stolen. And then the 5800 block of Boudry, we had a strong arm purse. Female was knocked to the ground by a group of guys. Moving on down to property crimes. Property crimes overall for the month compared to July, we're down 18%. Year-to-date, we're up 24%. That's due to increase in auto burglaries. If we look at the auto burglary category, we had 113 for August. This is up 7% for the month. Districts 3 and 5 were the hardest hit districts, and I brought a density map just to show where the hot spots are for auto burglaries. So District 3 consists of Denny's, Wells Fargo Bank, parking lot area, over to the Hyatt House Hotel, the public market area. But this hot spot that you see right here mainly consists of Denny's, Powell Street Plaza, Bay Street Mall, 4 Points Hotel, Wells Fargo, and the Hyatt House. So I did just a little brief analysis, time of day, day of week, for that area in particular.
Adrienne, is this a trend in the Bay Area? Because I know a little bit more where I live, auto burglaries have just soared.
Yeah, it's all over, it's regionally. Yeah, so bypass the second page that shows the year-to-date graph to see the day of week and time of day. So for Area 3, which is on the north side of Powell Street, Denny's, all that area, Tuesdays and Wednesdays were pretty popular, and even Saturday. Hour of day of the week, we had peak hours at 11 a.m., 7 p.m., and 9 p.m., but mainly 11 a.m. Then in Area 5, which would be the Plaza, Bay Street Mall, Black Bear Diner, 4 Points, that area. Mondays were pretty hot. Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. We had peak times at 10 a.m., 7 p.m., and 9 p.m. that really stick out. And the times for the two areas are pretty similar. We just have one peak time that's off an hour. So one is at 11, the other's at 10. Now, the year-to-date graph shows that there is definitely an increase in auto burglaries year-to-date. When you look at that graph, you can see that in January, we start out, and for 2016, we drop and then we go up and then we go down, up, down, down, up. So, but for 2017, January, we start to increase through March. Then from March to June, we're on a decline. From June through August, we increased. I know that there was one suspect that was arrested, that was Eddie Mute. He's still in custody, but there are other suspects that were released from custody that were a part of a, I guess they were coined as a gang back when they were arrested. So some of them are out. We're not sure if they are major key players in these incidents, but I know a lot of cities are experiencing the same things that we are.
When you say that they're out, they've completed their sentence, or they are out pending trial?
I have no idea. I know they've been released. Okay, so back to.
Before we go on, can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
So time of day, is that time that's reported or time that they think the crime occurred?
In this report, the time of day is based on a probability, a weighted, based on the time span. So it's not the first time of the report that's reported, it's the actual time span. I parked my car at 1 o'clock, came back at 3, found that it was broken into. So because we don't know the time that it actually occurred, there's a weighted method that we use to determine the probability of the crime occurrence. Okay, so moving on down to commercial burglaries. We did have a pattern this time. Commercial burglaries compared to July were up 400%. That's only up by 4. Small numbers generate large percentages. But year to date, we're down 61%. But this particular month, we had a pattern of burglaries. CVS and 7-Eleven was broken into. An unknown suspect used a rock to smash the front window, entered the business, stole merchandise, miscellaneous merchandise over at 7-Eleven. We had 2 occurrences there. And then over at CVS, we had 3 occurrences where the losses were liquor.
All 5 of those were windows smashed?
Yeah, all 5. And over at 7-Eleven, a rock was used, but at CVS, a water cover meter was used to smash the window. So we're not sure if it's the same guy, but we do know for sure over at 7-Eleven, there's video of a guy wearing the same clothing. Now, this clothing was not the same in CVS crimes. So when we're not sure who's doing it, we have no leads at this time. We haven't had any more since we had this short pattern.
What time of day were those 2?
These were during graveyard around 2 a.m., between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m.
Those are a short window.
Yeah. And he hit the lower part of the door, not the whole glass, just the lower part. Smashed, kicked it in, and then went in through that way at both locations. So residential burglaries, we're down by 33% compared to July, and still down year to date. No patterns, but we did have one occur in the 5900 block. It was an attempt in the 5900 block of Vallejo. A female was at home, and she heard something fall on her windowsill. When she looked over, she saw somebody flashing, using a flashlight to look in. She yelled out, the person fled. Then 1000 block of 45th Street, someone used a ladder to get into the second story window, and they stole a Xbox controller and jewelry. The resident thinks it may be someone that they know. Moving on down to, because there's nothing else that's really significant. Petty thefts, really, we have a lot of shoplifts over at the mall. East Bay Bridge and Bay Street. Down to arrests, we had 59 arrests. 56 of those were adults, 3 of those were juveniles. We had 2 adults that were repeat offenders. One of the adults were arrested on outside warrants, 2 outside warrants. And the other adult was arrested for breaking into a car at Black Bear, and then she was arrested for shoplifting. So when you turn over to, my chart. Year-to-date arrests, I don't have my chart. Yeah.
Second page.
So year-to-date, we're still down, as in terms of arrests for adults, we're down 25% year-to-date. And juveniles, we're down 40% year-to-date, which is good. And that's pretty much it. Oh, no. We have ECCL. We have those back. So we had 34 calls for service at the ECCL. We had 1 crime report, which was an auto burglary. Someone's backpack was stolen because he left it on the seat. There were no significant incidents. So it's pretty much officer-initiated security checks, and we did have some miscellaneous public service calls that we responded to. One, a disabled school bus was blocking traffic, and then we had some extra patrol during the first part of school, when school first opened. We went out and patrolled because parents are always double parking out there, so for safety measures, we had extra patrol out there. We did have a parent who wanted to report her son missing from a football game, but she did find him later. And that's pretty much it.
Go ahead, please.
I just have one question, which is, when it says security check, so who is making that call, and what is usually the call entail?
That's an officer-initiated call. They'll just put themselves out, or
Okay,
No,
so it's not like
no,
someone
no.
called in for service,
Right.
it's just a standard,
they're
okay.
doing a security check at this location.
Gotcha, thank you.
Just one of the city manager's coffee, which I spent the day at the city hall today. Somebody mentioned that there have been, that they were at the townhouse recently, and while they were, the hour that they were there were 2 cars that were broken into, and then apparently whoever did that also went over to the Honor Bar. So is that, it just seems like.
And we've had that happen in the past as well. We did get a good description of the car, suspect vehicle, and we did put that out to patrol officers, and we are on the lookout for those guys.
Back to the ECCO, do we know how many citations we wrote for people double parking?
I don't know.
Because I had several parents who were surprised that we were actually on the first few days citing as opposed to just giving warnings and telling them to move along. So it was kind of and it ended up, the stopped cars ended up blocking more and disrupting the traffic flow of drop-offs in the morning. So I'm just gonna have to share that with you guys, that if there's it's a high congestion area for 20 minutes, and to have a ticket right there really messes up the flow. It's not a well-designed pickup and drop-off zone, so.
Is it on San Pablo itself?
No, but they didn't do it on San Pablo, it's on
53rd?
Yeah. And so it just was, first or second day of school, somebody was writing a citation, and now you have the car that's double parked, the police officer with the lights on, and everything has to flow around them.
Was it several? Do you know any details on it?
I don't, because it's all second and third hand information,
Yeah, I
so.
have any recollection of something happening at the school
Yeah,
on the street.
first day of school, our officers obviously were out there and gave a lot of warnings, a lot of just keep moving kind of thing. The second day, I think 2 citations were issued. They were repeat offenders from the day before, and so they weren't. They got the warning the first day, and they said, "Oh yeah," and then the next day the same thing.
Okay, that's good, so I can share that with the PTO, and that'll make them happy. So thank you. Okay.
What do they have to do to get a citation? Do they have to,
Blocking the
like,
roadways.
Blocking travel lane.
and then getting out and leaving the car, or just being double parked in the car?
Usually they're not in the car, and then when the officer pulls up, they hustle back to the car.
Yeah.
Here, I'm here, I'm here.
Makes sense.
Ken, any public comment? Okay. No? Okay, good. So we'll move on to overtime reporting.
The documents should be making their way around. Our July overtime report, we're over. The difference from previous was $6,200, $2.11. That is consistent with our July numbers just for vacation and FMLA leave, but also in both months, July and August, sick relief coverage was either number one or number two of our expenditures. We do have quite a few people out on sick leave, either themselves or family or in conjunction with a on-duty injury. The high cost of $17,231 for vacation relief in July sort of shows that July is a big vacation month for most places, and we're no different than that. The difference from July and August is $17,000, and that was significantly because of sick relief, vacation relief, and minimum staffing levels, of which sort of coincide with people being out on duty injuries.
Any questions? Thank you.
I have two questions. Special events, are those events that the city has that we're paying for, or are those events that private, are reimbursable from private entities?
Both. So we have the 4th of July, it's not a city event and it's not reimbursable, but we do it because of the congestion on frontage road and all that kind of stuff as a service to the community. But other events, we did, the open house event was not captured in this month, but that's an example of a non-recoverable cost that we put out. We also had Coffee with the Cops events that are not cost recovery, so there's some overtime in those community events. But, for example, this run we have coming up on Sunday, we do get reimbursed for those duties. So it depends on the event. And if it's generally, if it's an outside organization hosted event where they request our services, those are paid dollar for dollar for our services. The other stuff is not.
Okay, and then on sick relief, and you mentioned that part of that includes officers who are out on injury or, yeah, thank you, FMLA. How many people are we out right now?
5 or 6. We have 4
we-
knees and 1 foot.
4 knees and a foot, and 3 on FMLA. So that's 7. And we have 3 vacancies on patrol with the 3 in the academy. We have 2 dispatcher vacancies, 1 dispatcher on administrative leave. That's it. 2 of our 5 sergeants are out. 1 is on FMLA, 1 is on injuries.
And are those in the standard range of normal, or are they any of those categories outside of normal?
They're cumulative injuries, so they're long-term absences, not a couple of weeks.
Okay, that's
So
not what I
we're
meant. I meant is the total number of absences as a percentage of department force, is that above? I mean, we expect in fire and police that you have a physical job, so some number of people will always have injuries or be sick, but out of a force of, if I rounded a number to 50, is having 10 people out of 50 and a normally high number? What's the range normally?
the range is usually 20 to 30% given. So when you look at all kinds of leave, when you look at officers who have to go to court, officers who have to go to training, injury, FMLA, vacation, you can expect a 20 to 30% vacancy on your staffing. That's the industry standard that people find.
And when are we at?
So we're I think at 40.
And then, training backfill, could you just, were you gonna go over August separately?
I can.
Well, or just explain what that is for me then.
The backfill for training is,
Someone's out and you have to hire someone off of who's not supposed to be on schedule to come in while they're at training? Is
Yes.
that what you- Okay, that's all, I just want to make sure I understand.
and that's in a job function where minimum staffing is required, not for, administrator being out or someone else being out, that they can be out for a week and we don't have to fill in behind them while they're gone.
'Cause I thought we had a schedule where they were supposed to go out on training in like sequences so that we could have people in and not overtime while we were
We
training.
do, and we have one day a month dedicated to training that is on duty time. But we can't accommodate all of our training needs on just one day a month. So there are other trainings that they have to go to. And our training overtime is much less than it used to be. And when I got here, I just did a quick look this morning, when I got here in like year 13, 14, overtime was $699,000. In 14, 15, it was $705,000. So when I got here in 15, 16, we were already in that year and it was 774. So 16, 17, we started with 446 and we finished, I don't have my final figure, but pretty close to that figure. So we've been managing it, monitoring it, and really making some cultural changes around overtime and availability. It's not easy to change the culture around that, but we're doing it. And one of the ways is that training day, because it does give us that day, 10-hour day on regular time to train. But it's not, we have so many mandates around training that one day a month doesn't cover what we need to do. So we have made an impact. It's just never going to go away completely. The other piece about training backfill is that we're hoping that Post will be reimbursing us for the mandated training, which has been drastically reduced. But there's talk that we're going to have more refund from Post for the Post is the Police Officer Standards Training Commission. That's something that we're looking forward to getting again.
I have one more question, if it's okay. My only other question is, when I look at the highest categories for July and I look at the highest categories for August, they total about the same amount of money there as the highest categories. That's ballparking, that's about $30,000 in each of those things, but the total amount for the month of July is $43,000 and the month of August is $61,000, and on the July one it says June was even lower at $37,000. So I'm just wondering, in August, since there's about $30,000 of the $61,000 showing, what are the other $31,000 in overtime due to? Like, you've only listed the highest categories, I know you probably have a whole list, but that means that there's a lot of other $5,000 categories, so I'm just wondering what they are.
We have a ton of categories.
The long chart?
Yeah. We
I,
have,
one of the things, we didn't track this when I came here, so one of the things I brought in was a tracking system to break it into all of the things that.
You don't need to read them all to me. If that's a document that you can distribute or share, I'd be happy to take one just to see what the scope of them is for one time. But I just noticed we always usually have this, and the scope is usually 30 to 40,000, and I've kind of been observing how the highest categories usually come in at about 30 to 35,000. We have a $61,000 month, so I'm wondering where there's a lot of categories that I'm missing somewhere.
Which dovetails into mine. I'm guessing there's a big cost for mutual aid and creating some overtime, or not?
The mutual aid for the Berkeley incident was about $3,600.
Oh, okay.
And we may or may not be reimbursed for that.
Yeah. So we pay out of pocket to go send people to Berkeley?
Yes, well, we have to pay our people.
But they don't reimburse us, is what I'm saying.
No, and for what we did and what it costs to us is not even close to what they do for us. You know, Oakland is frequently helping our officers along the border. Berkeley helps us, CHP helps us. So the mutual aid that we receive is way above and beyond that amount of $3,600 that we give that day.
That's great.
Yeah, it's.
When you're the smaller entity, you don't know the ins and outs of mutual aid.
Yeah, no, I was just curious what
Yeah,
that
We
looks like.
give one body and it's.
Yeah, no, it becomes,
Right. No, when we say help, we want them all to run
Yeah.
towards us.
yeah.
So we have to.
When we had the hashtag Berkeley protests a couple of years ago, and they were all on the freeway at Powell Street, was that our jurisdiction or was that CHP who was getting mutual aid technically?
CHP.
CHP was, okay.
Yeah.
Because I was in Emeryville, and I just wondered, like, all these officers came in, and I figured we got a ton of assistance, but I wondered if that was CHP's thing.
CHP.
They, they end up in Emeryville pretty often when they get redirected off of either Telegraph or.
Yeah, once the freeway's closed, it's get in the wagon or get on Emeryville Street, so.
Yeah, no, it's, I've had them down in Adeline, so that's been
Yeah.
great, so,
That's right, we do.
yeah, so. Great, thank you. I think that brings us to future agenda items. Bear with me as I. That does, and future agenda items.
I just have a question, not for any meeting. Do we have any policies related to how we handle officer interaction with transgender people?
Policies that call out specifically?
Related, yeah, so I'm aware of several cities in California that have policies on this, and I'm not looking to put this on the agenda. I just, for future, thinking of a future agenda item, I just wanted to use the space to ask you about that issue. If we, it sounds like we don't, because you know we did, I think.
Well, we do training around cultural sensitivity and, you know, how we interact with people of all, you know, races, religious beliefs, sexual orientation,
Is
gender
that a post-training that
identification.
we do for that issue, or do we do that in-house?
There's post-training for that, yeah.
Okay. That's
And
an
everybody gets
annual?
that in the academy. There is, I think it's a 24-month cycle for that one, for cultural competency, it's called,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, that's my only question. It's not an item to put on the agenda.
Okay. And with that, we come to a close, so thank you.